Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us, as always, University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
All right, as we take a look back at this week in the markets, it really wasn't one with a lot of pleasant news. Let's recap what happened.
Yeah, certainly another tough week for cattle markets. If we look at live fed cattle, they were down nearly $4 this week. Those feeder cattle prices also lower, steady to 6 lower across the many markets that we saw on the feeder cattle side. In the futures market, live cattle futures for June were down $1.75, as August feeder cattle futures were also down $1.75 this week. On the beef side of the equation, that choice box beef price moved lower again, down nearly $3.50 this week. You know, that puts it almost $12 below where we were a year ago at this time. If we look at the components there, ribs and loins certainly were a drag in terms of that choice box beef price. On the hog side, cash hog prices for the week were actually nearly $2 higher. The June lean hog futures contract was up 60 cents this week. We also saw the pork cutout value up nearly $2 this week. That actually puts the pork cutout value $13 above where we were a year ago at this time. So a very different story. And if, again, from the start of 2019 to now, we've seen a big switch between beef and pork in terms of those meat prices. Bellies were really important in terms of getting some strength in that pork cutout value this week.
Are we surprised to see this kind of different picture, really, as we take a look at the future side of things and the cash hog side of things? I mean, futures prices have had their setbacks, but they're still holding on fairly well. And we're seeing maybe a little bit more weakness on the cash side of things as we look at the reality of what's going on with China. Yeah,
I think, you know, we continue to have to remind ourselves that we have a lot of current supplies out there. And I think that continues to keep, you know, cash markets with maybe a little more of a lid on while those futures markets continue to speculate about what happens as a result of ASF in China longer term. And get some optimism there as the idea of being able to export more U.S. pork to China continues to at least be in the minds of some in the marketplace.
Scott, demand's kind of our theme today as we take a look at some of the things that come back on the domestic side of demand. Consumer confidence, as we take a look at those numbers, really some big numbers this week.
Yeah, so a lot of strength sitting there. I remind us, especially with a lot of the trade discussion that we've been on, it's nice to have strength in that overall consumer confidence. The index for May was at its highest level in 15 years, so a lot of strength unfolding there. We were up 5.3% in the overall index in May relative to a month ago. Much of that was led by expectations. Expectations are at levels we haven't seen since 2004. They were up nearly 10% month over month. So from April to May, a very large jump in those expectations. To me, that's all good news in terms of keeping consumers engaged in purchasing domestic beef and pork supplies.
Let's talk a little bit too then, as we talk about consumer confidence, those levels are high. Does that also kind of play back into what's going on the retail side of things? Do they all kind of marry in together?
I think it does. And I always like to start by reminding us that we've had a lot of increase in supplies of beef and pork in the marketplace. And so being able to hold retail prices, or in some cases talk about higher retail prices for beef and pork products is really quite impressive. If you look at that choice retail beef price in April, we were up slightly, so that's the fourth consecutive month of increases. We're sitting at $6.10 a pound. We haven't been there since June of 2017. We did see a little weakness in that pork retail price for April. It came in at $3.79, but that's still 3.5 cents above where it was a year ago at this time. So really, you know, we're seeing retail prices exhibit some strength that correlates very nicely with the overall consumer confidence.
Scott, anything else as we take a look at those retail prices?
Yeah, so I do think it's important to remind ourselves that pork isn't pork and beef isn't beef. We can talk about bacon, we can talk about pork chops, we can talk about steaks. All those things consumers are interested in different ways. And one of the ways to look at it is to compare April 2019 prices to the Aprils over the 2014 to 2018 period, just to make the point. So steak prices that are 6.6% higher leads the way in terms of an increase over that period. Bacon prices, you and I talk a lot about bacon over time. So bacon prices are only 0.2% higher. It reminds me that the run-up in bacon occurred maybe earlier than we might have thought about in the past. It's certainly held its own in terms of showing some strength. Pork chops, on the other hand, boneless pork chops down 6.1%. Those are some of the products that we need consumers maybe to have increased appetite for going forward. But maybe even more important, when you go to the chicken side, boneless chicken breast down 9.6%. It just reminds you that consumer trends have been important in those retail prices.
When we also look at the retail side of things and being able to continue to purchase at those higher price points for some of those products, does it mean that maybe we're confident enough where we are in incomes and jobs that we're okay spending a little bit more on those quality premium type products?
I do think you have a situation where you have folks that are buying up in terms of their restaurant outings, if you will. So instead of going to a more fast food oriented, it's more set down, higher priced kind of situation. I think that has certainly been at play. I guess the flip side of that is if the economy doesn't continue to hum along here for the remainder of 2019, you might see that buy down happen pretty quickly as well. So we'll have to watch both sides as we think about where this economy goes for the remainder of 19.
We know we're still seeing some support on the storefront, on the retail side of things. Domestic demand remains a huge part of this picture. Are we seeing this spring holding up to par per se, especially as we look at that cold, wet weather that we've had and that slow start to the grilling season?
Yeah, I do think when you look at what's not maybe been the best spring to get grilling season started, it has weighed on some of those prices. You look at the choice box beef cutout value, for example, and we talked about it earlier about it continues to be below year-ago levels. When you look at where we have been, and especially here about week 20, we're below all of the previous 5 years, 6 years, as a matter of fact, in terms of where the 2019 choice box beef price sits. So I hope that some of what's been going on is that the wetter, colder spring has kind of dampened that grilling outlook. And if we get some warmer weather, maybe we get a bigger boost. But normally by this point, we're over that first round of bump that we traditionally get from increased grilling.
Scott, as we wrap up this week, a couple of current news items. I think China continues to play a role in what's going on with the markets. We saw a purchase 2 weeks ago, then the tweet happened, and this week we saw China rescind and take back that purchase that they had made. As this back and forth game goes, what does this mean for the short and long term for U.S. pork prices? Is it just added and more constant volatility?
Yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with volatility. So we did see that announcement of a little more than 3,000 metric tons of pork being canceled as we saw the reports this week. To me, that's not insignificant. Let me make sure I start there. But however, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much pork. Yet that's been potentially a larger mover in markets. So this on again, off again continues to keep the markets for pork in that yo-yo pattern, if you will. We get strength one week, depending on the news that we get weakness the following. I think that continues to play into just where these pork markets go. And I keep reminding us that we're going to have to pay attention to what happens to pork consumption in China. We're starting, I think, to see some signs of a pretty rapid decline in consumption. So maybe the growth in trade we've all been hoping for might not be quite as large as we had anticipated.
And then as we talk this afternoon, so I probably should note that it's early afternoon as we're speaking. There's been talk that there's some sort of agreement on the metal tariffs as it relates to Mexico and North America and the USMCA. That's kind of been that last hurdle to get USMCA across the finish line. Does this give us a little bit of support and some positive news heading into the weekend and into next week?
I think it does. A USMCA to the finish line is nothing but good news on both the pork and beef sides of the equation. You and I have had a lot of conversation about what's happened to ham prices in this country as a result of the tariffs put in place. Getting a elimination of that ham tariff, if we get a successful USMCA, I think number one, boosts the amount of ham we can send to Mexico, and number two, raises ham prices in this country. Both of those things I think could be helpful on the pork side of the equation. So let's hope we're getting closer to a successful conclusion to USMCA, as we need to make sure that's a market that grows for us going forward.
All right, Scott, that'll do it for us this week as we take a look to next week. Hopefully we're talking about more positive news as it relates to trade agreements with Canada and Mexico, but also reports that we're watching for next week.
Yeah, so busy week next week. We'll get cold storage out on Wednesday, followed up by livestock slaughter report on Thursday, and then we'll finish up the week with cattle on feed on Friday.
All right, Scott, we will talk to you then. Have a great weekend.
You do the same, Megan.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And for market updates twice daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.